Duncan.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine. I understand you're the CEO of United Way of Hunterdon County.
That is correct.
All right. Well, we're here today just to talk about volunteerism in the county and with VIGU as well as with other organizations. Tell us about your experience, how you engendered and how you go about getting volunteers in all the different service areas.
So let me tell you what my approach to volunteerism is a little bit. I see volunteerism as a continuum of service. And the reason I say that is any kind of volunteerism has impact in our community, but it's not the same at all levels. So my first level would be no service, people who are just not engaged whatsoever. The next stage might be what most people would call community service. That may be somebody who's been in prison and may be asked to do community service to reduce a sentence. Kids in church who are being asked to do community service in order to get communion or a bar mitzvah. So they're being asked to get something in return in order to volunteer. So there's still a value to that,
Sure.
to those who are receiving the services that they're providing. So that sort of community service is kind of like the next level. Then you go up a step further, and I would call those folks maybe small V volunteers. And those are folks that if you ask them to come out and help you with whatever it is, helping to clean up a stream or volunteer for the day to do something, they will do so. They may still get something back in return, but they're now sort of being prompted to sort of just get out there, put in a little bit of time, and do good work. The big V volunteers, that's what, most nonprofits aspire to be able to motivate folks to do. And those are folks that volunteer in the moment, volunteer without being asked. And it's almost like intuitively they know when they are needed, and they just are present in the moment when they're most needed. What's interesting about that sort of picture is that I believe people can go up and down that continuum depending on what's going on in their life. When you're a young person, you're often encouraged by parents, teachers, or your faith-based organization to sort of move along in that direction. And at that point in time, you may have more time than perhaps money to support a cause that you care about. Once folks get older and they're working full-time and they're starting to raise a family, time becomes more of a challenge. And so maybe they start volunteering less, but maybe contributing more because they can. And then when folks sort of end their work careers and start retiring, then sometimes that changes again, where all of a sudden they have more time to give. So I think the critical thing is, how do we connect people wherever they are in that chain to get them to give back to the community? That's my sort of approach or view on volunteerism.
So Bonnie, let's say there's somebody out in the community who's watching this video and says, I want to be a volunteer. What would United Way do for them?
I think first and foremost is to have that conversation with them to sort of do your little checklist, so to speak. One, what do you care about? Do you care about animals? Do you care about the environment? Do you care about kids, old folks? What is it that sort of motivates you, or where is it that you want to make a difference? Because I think that folks want their time spent to be meaningful and to know that they're making a difference and having an impact wherever that may be. So having that sort of initial conversation so you can steer them to organizations or activities that would fit what matters to them. And then another one is, how much time do you have? And so working with their time commitment, that may limit or expand opportunities. Some opportunities may be a one-off. We need you just this Saturday to do this activity, and that's really all that's required. Others, there may be a weekly, a monthly, or an ongoing sustainable commitment to what needs to happen. once you sort of identified that, I think the next piece, and one reason why I think volunteer guardianship, for example, is so successful, is beyond the recruitment or sort of motivating people to give you guys a try, is that notion of training the volunteers so that they know exactly what's expected of them and what needs to happen. Understanding that some volunteer opportunities, all you need to do is just show up, but other volunteering opportunities, you may have to do a certain number of hours of training. You may have to be background checked. There may be obligations that you need to meet in advance to being able to volunteer. So knowing all that on the front end, I think creates a better match for the volunteer opportunity that you seek.
So people come in who want to volunteer, they have a particular skill set. If they step out of their comfort area, they're going to get plenty of training. And if it's still not comfortable for them, they can actually pair with somebody who can actually take on those tasks where they're not within their comfort zone.
Correct. So I think that there are many tasks or volunteer opportunities that may be what I would call lower level skilled, where just about anybody could learn on the fly how to do them. Others may be more complex in terms of skills required to complete the task, but then you either get the training for it, and isn't that a wonderful thing that you can get out of your volunteer opportunity, that you learned a new skill, that you meet new people, that you have an opportunity to interact in a way that maybe you can't at home or at work. So all of those are benefits that come out of that, whether it's through the training or through the actual volunteer activities.
It is interesting, though, that I find that some of the very passionate and very committed volunteers, like DJ, are full-time professionals with families and obligations, and yet they are so giving of their time. So you have a lot of folks out there, I think they're afraid to get out of their comfort zone because they feel that they're going to get overwhelmed. It's going to deplete them of whatever energies they have to do whatever they need to do in their own personal lives. What is it about volunteerism for these big V people? They're able to get this energy.
So I would say one of the things that, and I've said this to some volunteers before, is don't be afraid to fail. Some people are sort of this mindset that just because you say you're going to go do something, that you're going to love it, and you're going to do a great job, and you're going to get everything out of it. And then when that doesn't happen, you feel like, what happened? So allow yourself to fail. Like, you can go and do a volunteer activity, and if nothing else, you've learned that that's not really what I'm good at or set out to do. Try something else. Not all volunteerism is bad just because that one experience didn't turn out to be what you wanted it to be. I think people like DJ that I've had the privilege to work with for years, I think some of us sort of have had the opportunities to be sort of grounded in volunteerism throughout your whole life. And so it's not necessarily making a choice. It's a part of who you are. My first experience in a soup kitchen was at our house. My mom used to do a big pot of soup, and folks used to come to the corner of our house, and she would give out soup to make sure that people were fed. So I learned it at home firsthand right away. And my mother sort of just led us to know that taking care of others was part of who you are and what you do. Not everybody gets that. DJ was talking earlier about students, and some of them just need to be provided the opportunity. They've not been provided an opportunity to give back, and so they don't, because they don't know how or what's expected. So being able to teach kids, which I have had that opportunity to do, what are the needs in our community. People have this feeling that we're very idyllic here in Hunterdon County. It's like Lake Wobegon, right? Everybody's good looking, and everybody's getting along just fine. But when you barely scratch the surface here, you can see some real needs, some big disparities, whether it's in health or in income, and even in education opportunities. So when you have that opportunity to show people that that's what's going on in their community, especially the youth in our community, they want to help. They really do. They just need to be mobilized to do good work. So I have a lot of hope for the future leadership in volunteerism.
It's interesting too, developmentally, it's almost like a priority for parents to model for their children volunteerism. Because when you're talking about soup kitchens, it just occurred to me, well, as a kid, my parents constantly went to the community center and the church to put out food for families, but it was so much fun for me as a kid. I didn't think of this as volunteering. It's just a way of life.
Right.
And when my mom used to work with children who are developmentally challenged, it was just normal.
Right. So some of us have sort of normalized volunteerism as just part of our life instead of being the and then some. In a way, it's almost the same. I would say that for folks who haven't had that growing up, that opportunity, it's the same as when you give to a charity. Some people just give because somebody's asked. Other people are very methodical about budgeting for it. I have this amount of money and I'm going to split it up this many ways to support these things that matter to me. You can do the same thing with your time. I have this much time. This is where I want to spend it. And then start researching and asking people what's out there. You know, there is family volunteerism, individual volunteerism, corporate volunteerism. You can volunteer in so many ways as an individual or in a group. And they're just a myriad of opportunities out there. Sometimes you just have to sort of ferret them out.
Well, Bonnie Duncan, I want to thank you very much for today. You know, you talked about the whole gamut of volunteerism and the importance for children and for adults. Perhaps get out of their comfort zone a little bit, try some new experiences. There's a wealth of support out there through the United Way, through VGU, and you just have to open yourself to these experiences. Just say yes and be afraid to fail.
Let me tell you one last thing before we close, and that's think about the impact that volunteerism has on an individual and the community. So, you know, an individual tends to be less depressed, increases their self-confidence, and every volunteer I have ever met has always said they got more out of the experience than what they put into it. I've never heard somebody not, unless it's in a failure situation, but almost everybody does. On a community level, just think about the value of volunteer sweat equity puts into our community. If you were to take everybody in Hunterdon County and have them volunteer 3 hours in a week to our community, over the course of the year, that would be $7 million that is invested in our community in giving back in services that would otherwise need to be paid for. And that just lifts us all. And I think that, you know, volunteerism allows us to bring back some of our old cultural norms. You know, we talked about people getting older and growing up and dying in the same community. You know, being able to be in an intergenerational environment again, whether it's created artificially through volunteer guardianship or one that is, you know, built in reality, when young kids can help elderly people and bridge that intergenerational gap. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful, opportunity for everybody to learn.
It was interesting, as you mentioned that, just brings back to mind of COVID and how, despite all the challenges, my neighborhood became alive with children playing on the streets, with families talking to each other at a distance on their front porches. It's that sense of enrichment. People were awakened to what was missing in their lives with their 2-hour to work commutes, which added up to 4 hours of sitting in a bus a day, to just being able to be more grounded and having the time even to volunteer.
And the last thing really is, we think of our volunteer activities often as the one-on-one in the trenches, helping whoever we're helping. But the nonprofit community is truly a community that builds capacity to care and respond to our community's needs. And folks tend to forget that there's also the ability to lead. Join a board, join a committee, give back in that way, help that organization build the capacity and the resources it needs to deliver the services that are most needed in our community. We tend to forget how critical that volunteer board is to running our organizations and to making our mission work come to life.
So it's almost as if for those folks who think, I'm going to volunteer when I retire, well, that's great, and sometimes they do. But it might be better to just start a tiny bit of volunteering while with their busy schedules in order to get used to the process and the systems, so when they do retire, they have some meaning in their life. They can actually get involved with their community.
And they may have, at that point, identified what their cause is, whether it's one cause or three causes. They may have identified by then what it is that really matters to them. I always say, I don't care what you care about, but care about something.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does somebody get in touch with United Way?
We're easy to find. Our phone number is 782-3414. We do have a website as well, uwhunterdon.org. Our volunteer center is right off Main Street in Flemington, and it becomes a place and a space where people can volunteer. It's a little more old school. A lot of people started shifting everything to online volunteering, but as DJ said, sometimes it's the personal connect. When we bring our kids after high school and have them there with retired individuals who will tell them about what their work life was like, and like, oh, are you thinking about being an engineer? Let me tell you what it was like when I was working. I mean, those kind of experiences are unique and one of a kind, and really bring us together as human beings to address whatever issues going on in our community. You know, we've sort of danced around COVID. COVID has impacted us so much. So for us, even trying to say, well, what does volunteerism look like in COVID? We can't have, 100 people in one room doing good work. We have to consider that social distancing and what things can we do from home, and then sort of add them to what we're doing at the workplace or at an agency. I think we're all tasked to look at things differently, and some of whatever happens on the other end, it will all be better.
What about corporate volunteerism?
So I'm glad you asked that question. There are so many ways that corporations get involved. Again, some do it with money, but a lot of them have moved into allowing their employees to give time. Some companies will automatically pair with an agency based on a cause that is in alignment with what that company does, but others are just very open and allow individuals to volunteer where they want, and they'll actually provide time off for them to do it. It's a wonderful way for workers to take a day off and really get to know their community, especially if they haven't been able to volunteer in recent times. We call them days of caring often, and we work with a lot of our partners, so they may have an opportunity to paint one agency or deliver meals for another agency, and do a very different opportunities than maybe they would have done prior. And so in many cases, they're agencies that they've never heard of. Some agencies come with sort of national recognition, but here in Hunterdon, we have a number of grassroots organizations like yours, that you don't hear about that organization and what they do and how they help. So it's a wonderful way of connecting. What's in it for companies often is that it increases the morale of their employees. We are finding that younger generations coming in are actually selecting companies based on what their position is on corporate responsibility. And then in some cases there's incentives, for X number of hours, the company may make a financial contribution to that particular agency where the folks have been volunteering. So it's a real win-win for everyone. Again, we spoke about how you can learn new skills, so this is a way of branching out. When they do it as a team, it allows for team building within a company as well. So they get to learn new skills, they get to interact maybe with cross-functional teams within their company, and in many cases it's an opportunity for staff development for those who choose to do some other activities like committee work and board meetings, or providing their skill to an agency. There's some staff development that is free of charge for those companies as well. So corporate responsibility, giving back to our community that way is also critically important. It must be. We can't go back to the way it was. That wasn't good enough. Right. It must be better.
Make some progress. As DJ mentioned, it takes a village.
It does.
And the synergy of working with the GU and United Way together, as well as other organizations in the community, is making this organization blossom. I want to thank you very much for supporting our organization, and
we love
you're
you.
a vital leader in our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.